Anger boils over in Benghazi. Gaddafi may be gone, but Libyans aren't happy with the direction their country is taking. As thousands protest, the new leaders are being accused of not honouring those who died fighting for freedom. This is Inside Story. Hello, good to see you. Welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. It's less than 4 months since the war ended in Libya with the downfall of Muammar Gaddafi. And for 2 weeks now, people have been protesting again, this time against the slow pace of reform under the new leaders. On Saturday, up to 2,000 angry protesters attacked the Libyan transitional government's headquarters in the eastern city of Benghazi. They stormed the building and ran off with computers, chairs and desks, while the country's interim leader, Mustafa Abdul Jalil, was holed up inside. Libyans have become increasingly frustrated with the new leaders. Among other things, they want better compensation and more rights for those who fought Gaddafi's forces. Libyans are also particularly concerned about the new election laws the NTC is introducing. They say the public hasn't been properly consulted and the new rules don't live up to the democratic ideals they'd all hoped for. On Sunday, following those protests, the deputy head of Libya's NTC announced his resignation. Abdul Hafiz Goga said, "My resignation is for the benefit of the nation. Unfortunately, the consensus has not continued to maintain the highest national interests. The atmosphere of deprivation and hatred has prevailed." So, with elections due in June, are Libyans ready for a process many have never experienced? From Tripoli, Stephanie Decker reports.
They're taking it all in. This youth organisation, called H2O, is going around universities in Tripoli to explain to students the process of the upcoming election. In a country where political parties were banned for 42 years under Muammar Gaddafi's rule, it's a process many know nothing about.
The majority of students, they don't know about it. There's a lack of information, but they have an energy. They would like to participate, they would like to support Libya, but they don't know where to start.
There are mixed feelings here. Some are optimistic.
I'm the kind of people that are satisfied about how things are going right now. I mean, we have a lot of issues, as building a new country has, but we have to give the time.
But others feel frustrated and say the government isn't doing enough to explain what's going on.
I'm just like imagining if it happens in June, I'm going to be standing in a long queue with a voting card, and I'm going to put it, I'm done, and I don't know what the hell I'm voting for.
The students are given this booklet which explains the election process to them in a very basic way. Now, we're still right here at the bottom. There's still a 5-month period until the first elections take place here, and it takes them through every single step until a final government is elected here in 20 months' time.
Many political parties have been taking shape. From liberals to Islamists, all are vying to get a place in the 200-seat National Assembly that will be tasked with drawing up the constitution. Sadiq Karim is the chairman of the Democratic National Party, which is running on a liberal agenda. He says finding common ground in a country traditionally divided along tribal and regional lines will be difficult.
My nightmare, let me describe it this way, that just imagine the picture, the situation in Libya. We need to elect 200 people. 200 people for this national conference or the National Assembly, call it as you want. 200 they don't share a common idea.
And those divisions can be seen on the streets here in the capital. This protest is in favour of Islamic law, and across the road, an opposing group that thinks Islamic law or Sharia is not the way to rule this country. Libya has 5 months to get ready for a process that is alien to the majority of the people here, young and old. At the moment, no one is really sure of how things will turn out. Stephanie Decker, Al Jazeera, Tripoli.
So, is the Libyan National Transitional Council capable of handling the shift to democracy? To answer this, we're joined by my guests in London, Farah Abushwesha, representative of Women for Libya, a non-governmental organisation. In Oxford, we have Dr. Richard Baltrop, an analyst on Libyan affairs. and in Doha. Tarik Yousef, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institute. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. Tarik, let's start with you. These protests are extremely worrying for the NTC, of course. We've just seen the casualty of the deputy head resigning because of them.
I would say very worrying, but I would quite frankly also submit very expected. I was just in Libya in the last week and noted in the city of Benghazi a growing perception that things are not going the way people expected them to go. And we're not just here talking about the limited capacity of government to address urgent needs, needs that have to do with the provision of public services, salaries, getting the banking system to function more normally, but a growing perception that the revolution could very well be hijacked by vested interests that are connected to the old regime. Growing perception of corruption in particular, and nepotism in the appointment of public servants. Those perceptions, I think, over a period of time, and given the limited credibility and I would say loss of credibility by the NTC over the last couple of months, are directly responsible for the explosion we saw in Benghazi of public protests in the last 48 hours. More of it possibly to come if the NTC does not reinvent itself, does not become more transparent, and does not live up to the demands that were very much at the core of the revolution.
It's interesting that Goga has stepped down, the deputy chief, because he was one of those who was being accused of opportunism by critics who were saying, you know, he only belatedly defected from Gaddafi's regime.
Very much so, although I would say a lot of people cut Goga and many others plenty of leeway in the last 8 months. They've embraced them, they've trusted them. But I think the disparity, the gap between the announcements and the performance on the ground, and especially the questions of continued corruption, nepotism, and a sense that this revolution is about to be hijacked, if not already, by a group of vested interests that will not achieve the goals and the aspirations of the Libyan public, and certainly are incapable of solving practical and simple problems on the ground, such as banking, liquidity, safety and security in major cities. There is a sense in Libya that the NTC has proven itself incapable and may not in fact be capable, even under the best of scenarios, to capture the moment and to take initiative, and that is what this is about.
Let me bring Richard in. Richard, are these fair criticisms? Because, I mean, these are people who are still trying to find their feet.
It's an enormous challenge for the NTC. The word that comes to mind for me is expectations. How does the NTC manage the public expectations during, as you said at the beginning, just the past 4 months and the coming months?
And of course, with the preparation for elections, I mean, that is the big thing looming on the horizon. Many people concerned about the kind of election process they're getting and the kind of education people are getting about what's expected of them, what's going to happen.
Yeah, it seems that a lot of good measures have already been taken to start civic education about electoral processes. For me, the greater concern is how the NTC manages public expectations about changes in salaries or new jobs, reassignment in ministries, new positions for people. And of course, among the public, there are positive expectations of change after the revolution, but there are also expectations that certain benefits of the old regime and the old system will remain intact. There are sections of the public who will want to receive benefits, soft benefits of the old regime, and want to continue receiving them.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Farah, when we talk about expectations, one specific concern is for the women of Libya, particularly with the draft electoral law which is being put forward, which doesn't really address the issue of women's representation in the National Assembly. They've only been given a 10% quota.
Yes, I mean, I'd like to begin by saying that this is new to us. It's new to us as Libyans. You know, we haven't had a democracy for over 42 years, as everybody knows and has witnessed. And people fought hard together in order to achieve the kind of freedoms. And I think I go back to what Richard was saying about, you know, the expectation gap. I mean, certainly women had a very high expectation of what role they would play in the future governance of Libya. And I think that when the initial draft election laws gave a 10% quota, I mean, we felt like it was an insult to us. And now we have discovered in sort of pre-announcements of changes to the elections, which I believe may have been postponed until next week, which is a great thing, and I commend the National Transitional Council for this. We believe that there's no quota at all for women, which, you know, women are a stabilising force within society, which is exactly what we need right now in Libya, because there's so much instability. And, you know, the National Transitional Council has a huge job and task at hand, as people have recognised who spoke before me. And I do feel that we need to kind of encourage them to go back and engage with people. I mean, you know, how the whole election draft law was handled seemed to me like a bit like a missed opportunity. Certainly Women for Libya, with our talks with our colleagues on the ground, you know, people are very unhappy with how it's been handled. And I think that the greatest thing is the lack of transparency that there's been in how decisions have been made.
Well,
and when you have a lack of transparency and communication...
let me just, while we're talking about the draft election law, let me just inform our viewers about why it has been such a subject of controversy. Critics have been vocal about three major issues. One, they're concerned with gender representation, as we've been talking about in the National Assembly, talking about a 10% quota, that's of 200 seats, only being reserved for women. There's also debate about the role of Libya's expatriates. Now, the law seems to indicate that Libyans with dual nationality will not be able to run for election. And finally, the document doesn't tackle how the country's voting districts will be divided. Farah, I mean, you're talking about how the transparency of this and how this election law was debated. The NTC actually formed a committee, didn't it, to look at this and look about and talk about the best way to take Libya forward. But lots of people clearly don't think this is the best way.
Well, they didn't exactly discuss it. It was all behind closed doors. We have yet to know who those 8 committee members were. This is again the lack of transparency that is frustrating people. It's also creating mistrust, and it's creating a rumour mill that is rampaging throughout Libya, and that's where the frustrations are coming from. That nobody knows what is happening. Nobody knows who is making these decisions. For women, you mentioned there about the dual citizenship. You know, it's not like a lot of people just went abroad with Libya and emigrated.
No, a lot of them were forced abroad, weren't they? Forced into exile, yes.
You know, were sent into exile. Now, these are the same people, you know, who did come back and fought alongside, you know, Libyans on the ground. And you know, we those of us abroad, it was not the same as watching those on the ground. That there is no kind of comparison in that kind of way. Having said that, people have achieved a level of education both inside and outside of Libya. And if it is in the best interest of creating a Libya that is an inspiration to all, then use all the available skill set that we have, both within the diaspora, the exiles, and the dual nationals, as well as those on the ground.
Tarik, what do you make of this? There does seem to be some strange requirements of who can stand as a candidate. For example, the expatriate thing for one, but also having to have a professional qualification. Why are decisions like this being made?
Quite frankly, I would say that this is precisely another indicator of why the public has lost faith in the NTC's ability to steer the country in the direction of building the foundations for transparency, democracy, pluralism, and political freedom. The process of drafting the election law, the membership of that committee, communication with the public, and then the precise content of this draft law, I would say, fed not just into the rumor mill, but into the anger that finally boiled into the protests we saw in Benghazi and possibly elsewhere. Take, for example, just the issue of dual nationality. For the committee to invoke a law that was passed by Gaddafi to exclude the opposition abroad from being Libyan citizens, to deny in a free Libya expatriate Libyans from not just running for office, the draft law prohibits them from even participating in the voting process itself or in casting a vote. It seems these draconian practices on the part of the NTC within the context of a lack of transparency or knowledge of who is in fact been mandated to do this is what is confirming for a lot of people the perception that the very revolution's future, the demands of this revolution, the future of a pluralistic, open, free and a democratic Libya is at stake, and it's not at stake in the next 8 months. Some people would in fact doubt that the NTC has the intention or could pull off holding the elections on time and in a manner that would meet basic international standards. I think that is what is behind the buildup of anger and frustration that the other guests have just pointed to.
Richard, I wonder if you've got a comment on that. We've seen other countries pulling together elections in a very short space of time. We've seen it in Tunisia, seen it in Egypt. Do you think that Libya is going to be able to produce elections which are seen to be free and fair and up to the highest standards that the international community would want to see?
Yes, I believe technically they've got the capability and they have the will. The amount and extent of debate there has been about the electoral law is in one respect a positive reflection on Libyans and their capability to look critically at the new electoral law and their demands, their legitimate demands for representation and demands for issues of particular interest to be appropriately addressed. So I believe there's the technical competence for relatively free and fair elections to be conducted more or less in line with the schedule. What about the issue of tribalism, though, in these elections? Because there is this issue of national reconciliation. Has the NTC done enough to overcome those kind of divides? Is it right to refer to those as divides in the first place? Tribal differences or affiliations in Libya are yes, they exist and they're part of the country, and it won't be possible to eliminate their relevance to people's affiliations and people's willingness to vote for one candidate or another. And it's not possible to remove people's regional or tribal type interests from an electoral process. So ultimately it won't be removed from the electoral process. What
do you think, Farah? I mean, clearly the NTC has got a lot of challenges ahead, but can it pull off elections?
Well, I was just thinking about your tribalism and what Richard was just talking about there, and it couldn't help but make me think of Westminster being, and various different areas being sort of a Tory stronghold or a Labour stronghold. I think, you know, by our nature within society, certain areas and certain demographics are going to have a certain preference for certain candidates. That's it, but it's important that we engage with all members of those tribes, those districts and areas, both the women, the grassroots organisations, and the youth and minorities and religious minorities within those, so that they feel that they're being heard too, because that is the fundamental sort of basis of democracy, is it not, to have a voice and be heard. And Libyans are being heard. What the National Transitional Council, you know, it's got an opportunity now. It's allegedly, well, I've heard that they've delayed the announcement of the election laws. It now has an opportunity to engage with people again. I mean, Women for Libya would be quite happy to get, you know, different women's organisations from around Libya together.
What about the rising influence of Islamists, though, Farah? Is that a problem for women in particular?
I think that the, you know, the Prophet Muhammad, you know, he worked for one of his wives, and you know, he went into battle alongside his second wife. I think that we can't confuse sort of people being devout and being religious. I think that there are all different factions in Libya and they all must be heard and they all have to have a voice, but together, like they did with the revolution, standing side by side, then we can make Libya the country that will be an inspiration to the rest of the world. But we have to work together on this. We can't be, you know, broken up and divided. We need to work together and we need to have all voices being heard. And women are half of the population, if not a little bit more. And you know, they have a record of you know, once they're engaged, being, you know, a great sort of benefit to society, and it's recognising that benefit. And getting the National Transitional Council to stand by their promise and the expectation that women had, that women would be more involved and engaged in the future of the country.
That might not happen, though, if the more conservative Islamists gain a toehold. I wonder what Tarik feels about this. Tarik, we've seen, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood doing quite well in Egypt and in Tunisia, and there is a growing influence of Salafists in Libya. Is there a concern that the more conservative side will gain more power and influence through these elections?
I think the more conservative side of the political spectrum, and not just because Libya happens to be a conservative society in more ways than perhaps many of its neighbors, the more conservative voices and opinions would likely prevail in the political scene. And this, there's also another reason that has to do with the fact that the religious parties or the religiously inclined parties happen to be the most organized. They're the ones who would first occupy the political space. They would appeal to the public in more ways than others are capable or organized to do the same.
Are you worried by that?
I don't think that necessarily worries me. My primary concern right now is with the lack of a vision for the country, the lack of charisma, the leadership at the top, the lack of the growing credibility problem the NTC has, and the demands that and the promises that it has cut out for itself when it announced the end of hostilities and declared the liberation of the full country. I wonder, under these circumstances, whether in fact the right kind of Libya, the Libya that we all dream of, will be given the best possible chance.
Well,
and
Farah
I would say
was talking about all voices needing to be heard in Libya. Do you think it's possible that all voices are going to be heard?
I think all voices will be heard. The only question is in what manner and what modality. The more transparent, more inclusive the NTC is in the next 6 to 8 months, the more it reaches out to the public and in fact reconfigures itself and reinvents itself to be really the voice of Libya and Libyans in the future, the more likely we are to see the promise of a future Libya along the lines that we all have just discussed. But there are fault lines that we cannot ignore. And those happen to be the ones you've precisely just alluded to. Strong regional issues, strong tribal issues, and a divide along religiosity that can become much more extreme if not managed well. I think it is precisely because of this that we need to demand the highest performance and standards of openness from the NTC at this very critical and incredibly fragile moment in Libya.
Richard, I see you nodding to that. I mean, clearly the international community is going to be watching this very closely because, I mean, all their efforts and their intervention in Libya is leading to this moment. These elections are going to be the fruition of their goals.
Well, I agree with Tarik's comments, and the challenge for the NTC is to allow the population to feel that their voices have been heard, and then to allow disagreements or bring about peaceful management of disagreements. And the NTC has one source of legitimacy around which people can agree, and that is that it draws its legitimacy from having guided the revolution during last year, 2011. And the word vision was mentioned earlier in the discussion, and that is a test for the NTC. Can it now create a new vision looking to the next, not just 1 year, but beyond the next 5 or 10 years, around which loosely people can agree?
OK, Richard, thank you very much indeed for that. And thank you to all my guests in London, Farah Abushwesha, in Oxford, Richard Baltrop, and in Doha, Tarik Yousef. Thanks for watching. If you want to send us your feedback, email us insidestory@aljazeera.net. But for me, Shuli Ghosh, bye-bye for now.